leaders or leadership is not a role, it's an action. So anybody could be a leader. I don't care if you're an entry-level person or you're the executive of the company. What leadership means to me is helping people succeed, period. If you really like having diverse roles, it's going to be good for you. If you have a checklist and these are the only things you want to do today, HR generalist role, probably not going to be good for you.
What are some examples of illegal questions to ask during an interview?
How old are you?
What?
Most of my clients, my private clients, they don't have HR. So they call me and say, help. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission actually came out with guidance on using AI in selection, meaning in recruiting. And so if you're using a robot, so to speak, to help weed through resumes, the robot may accidentally or intentionally project bias, which could be discriminatory. I always say, though, don't blame the manager, because the manager may have actually been getting rid of people who shouldn't have been there to begin with.
If somebody's looking into getting into this profession, what type of job should they Google? Hello, everybody. Welcome to the My Career Shop podcast. In today's episode, we're excited to welcome Wendy Sellers, the HR lady, a no-nonsense human resources expert and a force in the field. Wendy's not only an HR and management consultant, but also a dynamic speaker, author of the book Suck It Up, Buttercup, an educator, and host of the HR Lady podcast. She specializes in attracting and retaining talent while keeping companies out of court by equipping managers, business owners, and employees with the tools they need to succeed. With over 25 years of hands-on experience in HR, ops, and management, Wendy brings a practical, result-oriented approach that cuts through the fluff. She's armed with a master's in HR and another in healthcare administration as well, has multiple HR certifications, and when it comes to HR, she's seen it all, done it all. So thank you for coming today to discuss the career path of human resources, Wendy. Glad to have you here. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. You know, life's good. It's about to get a little bit crazier with a new year coming up in the United States, no new president, and we in HR think a lot of laws are going to change. So as soon as we think the laws are done changing, here it comes again.
Well, every 4 to 8 years, right? Just to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, absolutely. But the interesting thing is, you know, since the pandemic, it just coincided with so many laws changing. They didn't even have anything to do with COVID pandemic, but there has been so many laws that have changed in the past 5-6 years. So HR has definitely been on our toes.
Yeah, right when the pandemic actually started, I remember HR related, even the lawyers, we had to draft all this documentation about working from home, tax consequences and all that. So I can only imagine intimately within the field, there was even more, right? So that's interesting. I'm also on social media. So I know that during this election period, pretty much everyone's social media dove. And now it's time to pick back up. So anyways, the field of HR is huge. I'd love to know, for somebody that doesn't work in human resources, can you kind of summarize what the field is about?
Probably not summarize, because HR is so complex, regardless of what the size business is, whether it's 3 employees or, 300,000 employees. HR goes everywhere from pre-hire, so recruiting, all the way to retirement and post-retirement, because depending what type of retirement plan and benefits you have for your retirees, you still have to manage that. And then there's everything in between. So there's like the compliance side. And then on the other side, there's the emotional, the empathetic, and the management side. And most businesses in the United States, really in the world, but most businesses in the United States are actually small businesses. And so that means they don't even have HR. They don't have an HR expert. It's somebody trying to figure it out, or a bunch of somebodies, usually the business owner, maybe a manager over here, a leader over there, trying to figure out, what are the laws? What do we have to comply with? So it's like half legal, a little bit of marketing, a whole lot of coaching, mentoring, mental health care. And then on top of that, many HR departments also handle payroll, which I personally do not feel, I do not agree with that. I don't think payroll should be part of HR at all. That's kind of an old school mentality that hopefully the younger generations will shove out the door and send back to accounting.
So you would say, like in a nutshell, right?
It's about caring about your employees. It's really about two things: compliance, because there's laws and you have to follow them. You got no choice. Like the laws or not, you have no choice. You have to follow them. So HR has to be half lawyer and then a heck of a lot of employee relations, fixing problems, whether the problem is, hey, I have an issue with my benefits, or I have an issue with my time card, or, I'm having a issue at home and it's affecting my workplace. So I find it interesting that it's two totally, completely different skills. And we in HR are expected to have all of those skills, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could you
Fair
imagine?
enough.
Could you imagine a lawyer giving mental health coaching to their client?
I can tell you, Wendy, we pretty much do. We're part-time psychologists and therapists as well. So we have some stressed out clients that need to be put at ease.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that was more on the employee relations side. On the compliance side, like what kind of legal stuff do you run into? Like paying people on time, stuff like
Yeah, I
that?
mean that stuff's probably the easiest thing to figure out. Although I say that, easy, it depends. If you have complicated schedules, and depending on what state you're in, there's certain laws, depend how you pay your employees. But if you just pay them regular, whatever, $40 an hour, and if they go over 40 hours in a work week, you pay them overtime. That's pretty easy to figure out, unless you have some complicated payroll system. The other things, though, are, let's just say, oh, I don't know, marijuana in the workplace. Oh, well, it's illegal in my state. It's not even recreational. Okay, that doesn't mean that you could fire somebody for using cannabis because they may be using it for a medical treatment. Is it, can you fire them? Yes, but it depends. So our traditional answer in HR is always, I need more information. It depends. Hey, can I do this? It depends. I need more information. So that's like a hot topic right now, marijuana in the workplace, because of all the different laws, the conversation about abortion as well, because it is a protected health situation. So it's covered by the ADA and some other things, even if it's illegal in your state. So it gets complicated. It gets really, really complicated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I can see how that could get a little messy. And the answer is almost, it depends. Like, you guys do sound like lawyers because there's so much context. Everyone's afraid of AI and stuff. But in the real world, I found that there's no linear answers,
Right.
right? There's always this situational component, and there's so many different factors that influence how you give an answer, which is why you need to know so much industry knowledge. So it does always depend.
It really does. And like I said, I feel like I'm a lawyer half the time, which I'm not, but I know a lot of lawyers. And so I rely on them to give me information, especially when complicated laws are coming out. And then the other part of the time, I feel like, again, I'm like a mental health counselor, a career coach, an educator. I'm a huge educator. I love educating people. But half the time I have to educate myself just on the
Mm-hmm.
one situation that I could have swore I've done this same thing over and over and over again. Oh, they threw that word into the conversation. Nope. Now I need to go do some research because it depends.
It's true. It's true. So, what led you to pursue a career in HR? Like, what was your journey like?
It was very interesting. So I went to college for basically medical. I was going to go into pre-physician's assistant. And I got into college and I was like, oh no, this isn't for me. This is absolutely not for me. So then I switched and, I stayed in the medical field, but went for the administration side, healthcare administration. And I was like, yeah, I could totally do this. And then I quickly went and got a master's in healthcare administration, which I now regret because then when I got into the real field, I was like, oh, I can't do this. You can't make decisions quickly in healthcare administration. And I'm a problem solver where I like to make unique situations and decisions and, not be sitting around waiting. There's a lot of red tape in healthcare administration or in healthcare in general. And so I was working, in some jobs. I moved to Florida where I live now, kind of on a whim. And that's when we had these paper resumes. And I was standing in an elevator with a paper resume going up to meet somebody for an interview. And in the elevator came a recruiter, like a staffing agency. And she looked over at my resume and she said, hey, can you do HR? Because I have somebody that needs an HR person. I was like, yeah, I could probably figure it out. And that's how I started my HR career. Folks, I would not at all suggest it that way.
So, if you were to suggest it, how would you recommend that people go down this path? And what's like the ideal career path? Because like I saw that it's not traditional in the sense that like a licensure type, you go finish your bachelor's, then you write a bunch of exams. So, what is the ideal path for someone who's just starting off to become an HR professional?
Yeah, so I would try to get some kind of internship, not, and regardless of what your age is or what your background is, but try to do some internship or maybe even if it's like a shadowing opportunity, so that first of all, you can see the reality of HR, that it is a lot of problem solving, a lot of compliance. So you're have to stick to the rules, but then be nice at the same time and help people with their professional and even personal problems too. So I would 100% try to get some kind of mentorship, internship, something like that. See if you can shadow an HR person. I have a lot of people that call me and ask me questions, and I totally invite any of your listeners to do the same thing too. Just send me an email and say that you've listened to me on this podcast. So I can help you. I had a younger person call me yesterday and said, I need a mentor. Can you help me? I said, well, I don't know if I could be a consistent mentor to you, but what are your concerns? And she's in HR and she doesn't know if she wants to stay in HR because she actually really likes the compliance side, but not the employee relations side. So I'm like, well, you just need to be in a bigger company than what you're in right now so that they can have a full-time compliance person and then maybe a full-time employee relations person over here. But definitely just reaching out and asking people. Most people in HR want to help other folks. That's why that we got in it. We got in HR to help people, or we stayed in HR, I should say, to help people. And so most people that are experienced are going to want to help you.
But in terms of prerequisites to enter the field, what are even the names of job titles that you look for in the HR field, and how do you get there? Are there any certificates that you need? Do you need to undergo a particular education? Do you need some level of experience or training?
Again, it depends, right? Every organization is different. Ideally, the ideal situation that a hiring manager would want is somebody who has a degree of some type, preferably with a focus on in human resources. Now, I want to just stop there a second because even though I have 3 degrees, I am not a believer that everybody needs a degree to do their job. If you are doing online or not even online, but you're doing certifications or just training, management training, HR training, coaching, getting a coach, getting a mentor, you could probably get qualified to get an entry-level job in HR and then build your way up and then get, if you wanted to go back and get a degree or certifications, which I'll talk about in a second. So I don't want anybody to think that you have to have a degree to do human resources. You could probably there's so many online certifications through organizations that aren't even the big 2. The big 2 that have the certifications is HRCI, which is HR Certification Institute. And that was the original HR certification. And then there's also the Society of Human Resource Management that also have certifications. Now, the pros and cons of those are that the main prerequisite is that you have like a 4-year degree or equivalent experience, but They do have options if you don't have a degree. And so you just got to keep digging, and then you may have to get a bunch of reference letters and things like that so that you can prove that you are knowledgeable enough to sit for these certifications. So the pros and cons are, if you get the certifications, that looks amazing on your resume. The cons are they're expensive, they're time consuming, and some of them are very difficult to pass because, how do I put this bluntly? They don't make sense. They expect this one person to know every single thing about HR. When you're in your real HR career, you're not going to know everything. You're going to lean on lawyers, you're going to lean on accountants, you're going to lean on other people as well. And so, if you have the capability and the money and you're a good test taker, definitely get one of those certifications. And I would say I would lean towards initially the HRCI certification.
Okay, but these are not prerequisites. So I can technically, if I want a job in HR, I can apply at a company for an HR role, and I'd start at a very, very low level, entry level, and then I would just climb my way up. And there's absolutely no barriers to entry.
Right. It's not like an accountant, like a CPA. You don't need a license. It's not a state or a license. It's just a certification. Some companies do say that this is a requirement, though. But I would say most small businesses, which is the majority of the United States, they're going to say, okay, you seem smart. You did some online trainings. You've proved to me that you actually are passionate about being in HR. You answered the questions, you interviewed well. Obviously, your resume needs to look good too. Don't lie about it, but definitely make sure you use things from your current career or your current experience to transform it into how can that help an HR role. But you can definitely start from the ground up and educate yourself as you're going without having to get like a 4-year degree, a master's degree, or these certifications.
Okay, I have so many questions. You said a certification process can be very expensive. Like, how expensive can it be in comparison to like a bachelor's degree or a master's
Oh,
degree?
definitely cheaper than a degree.
Yeah,
Definitely
okay.
cheaper than a degree. But the problem is if you're in a company and you're working in an HR role or you're transferring to an HR role, try to get the company to pay for it as one of the benefits. But if you're doing it yourself, it adds up. Even if it's only a couple $100s to get the certification, you usually have to then buy the programs to study from. So you either join a program, join a group, join something like that, or you get the online programs to study from. The SHRM ones are much more expensive. I've actually taught the SHRM course at a local college, and I wasn't impressed. I'll just tell you that, because I already had the 2 SHRM certifications, and I was like, sure, I'll teach this course. And the people that were in the course had no business being in that course. I was like, you are not going to pass this test whatsoever. And they know that, and they're taking your money. And so I am no longer officially certified with them. Even though I passed the courses, I was certified for many, many years. I just didn't renew my certification. It was an ethics and moral thing. But you could also, find a used book that somebody used to take the course and study from it, and then just say, I've studied the course, I just can't afford to do the certification. And if I was an interviewing manager, I'd be like, well, that's pretty cool that you studied all this information and you know the information. Come work for me, and then I'll pay for you to go sit and take the test.
What is the job title of an HR professional?
Oh, there's so many. There's so many. They could be HR business partner. They can be employee relations coordinator. They can be, it could be recruiting. It could be benefits, manager. So there is everything and anything from attraction to onboarding to employee relations, benefits, payroll, which I don't like that's in HR, but let's face it, it is in many businesses, all the way down to, I am the director of employee relations, or I'm the director of human resources, or I'm the director of compensation and benefits. So it kind of goes everywhere. Some organizations may have even safety under human resources. If it's a big organization and, they're a safety sensitive organization, the safety department might be under HR, or it may not. It may be under something else. So There's no like real rule of thumb. I find that in smaller businesses, the titles are inflated to make the position look good, right? And that's with everything. It's not just HR. So it says,
A
oh,
chief
this is,
executive.
yeah, or even just like, it's a 30-person company or a 50-person company, and they're like, this is our director of human resources. And it's like, well, they're also throwing the garbage out at night too. So don't get this is what I tell people. Don't get caught up in the title, even though we all want to have a fancy title. I know I did for sure. It meant something, but don't get caught up in the title. Look at the actual job description and find out what is the job description. Because if it says you're the director of HR, but you're sitting there, answering emails from applicants and things like that, and you're doing payroll, basically you're the payroll manager and you're the recruiting person with a little bit of employee relations thrown in.
Well, I was asking because from the perspective of a career path, I'm always thinking about if somebody's looking into getting into this profession, what type of job should they Google? What should they look for?
I would look for like human resources coordinator, human resources administrator, human resources manager, things like that. But many other companies, especially, so here's the other thing. If you have a decent sized company and maybe they have a couple locations, they may have centralized HR or decentralized HR. So they may have like, okay, payroll, benefits, everything that could be done for all the locations are in, the main office. And then in each location, there's one person that handles everything else. And they're usually called an HR business partner. And so they're running around that one location, putting out fires, making sure everybody's okay, answering questions about policies and PTO, handling maybe local investigations, workplace investigations, and performance improvement plans and incidents, conflict resolution. Those positions are usually much more hands-on, and you've got to be able to do a little bit of everything. If you're in an organization that says we're centralized HR and HR is all in one building and all here together, and we just fly out to the other organizations, you're probably going to be more specialized in your career versus having to know a little bit of everything.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So you've been in the industry for a long time, right? If somebody was considering HR as a profession in 2024, do you recommend that they either get a degree? Do you recommend that they get a certification route? Like, if you're trying to hire someone, what are you looking at, and what do you think the industry kind of favors?
So these days, especially since the pandemic, even small business wants some kind of experience and preferably some kind of certification. Some proof that says, hey, you know what you're doing, and you know where you can't, repeat every single law. You know where to find it. You know how to find that information. So most businesses these days, because HR has been hot and heavy since the pandemic because we needed it, right? Most businesses are going to say, I want you to have some kind of either degree in HR or business administration, for example. And if you have a degree in business administration, even if it's a 2-year degree, then have experience in HR. And if you don't have the experience, have proof that you've got some certification or are attempting to get it, maybe going to school for it. I hesitate to tell people that are listening, yeah, you need to get a 4-year degree, but many businesses do require that. I'm the one that's out there telling these businesses, knock it off. Don't require everybody to have a 4-year degree because it's expensive. And if you want them to have a 4-year degree, then you got to pay them up here. And many small businesses cannot do that. So, it just depends on the organization.
Well, that was going to be my next question. How much compensation, like how much does it change in terms of how much you get compensated if you get a degree versus not getting one? I guess there's three buckets for me, right? There's absolutely nothing in just experience, like no certificate, no degree, right? Then there is just certification. Then there is bachelor's. And
Yeah.
like, what do you see?
There's definitely a difference. I mean, if you just have hands-on experience and figured it out on your own, if you're new at it, you're going to start at the bottom of the barrel, whatever that might be. And it's different depending on where you live. But HR since the pandemic, the pay for HR has gone way up. Finally, we're equivalent with all of the other roles that the company needs, but there was a major need. I don't see it going down anytime soon, even for small businesses. So what they typically do then is say, well, just get the person over here that's, at the receptionist desk or doing payroll. Not to knock any of those, but let's just get them more experience in HR and send them the online trainings or whatever it is so that they can, contribute more to the company, and then we will pay them more money. So there's that. The next one is certification, which again, it's a catch-22 because technically those two big certification companies that I mentioned, technically they say you have to have a degree to get the certification. But when you really weed through there and see the requirements, you can have an equivalent knowledge, or there's now, I don't know how to explain it, a smaller certification. So it's not the Mac Daddy certification. It's for people that don't have the bachelor's. So start there, start small there and get the certifications. If it's on your resume that you have the certification or you're in the process of getting it, you're probably going to there's going to be more expected of you, which means now your value is going to go up. And then, of course, then there's the degree, whether it's a bachelor's degree. And I have to tell you, a lot of companies require a master's degree. I think they're shooting themselves in the foot in the big picture. If it's an everyday HR position. Now, if it's a VP, a true VP or something like that, I could see where a master's degree would be required. But I just think that younger people today aren't, not everybody, but many of them are saying, no, we're not going to college because we could learn this stuff outside of college. So I'm really hoping society catches up with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you live in the state of Florida, so I just kind of want to get an appreciation of how big the differences are. So, like, what would you say Joe, who has absolutely no certificate or education, would start off in versus somebody that has certification versus somebody that starts off with a bachelor's degree at a company?
I'll go in reverse order just because I'm my recruiter is actually looking for an HR like senior manager role right now. And it's for a small business. So it's really going to be that's their title, but they're doing everything. And they're looking for at least 5 years experience as a manager. And it needs to be a hands-on role. So they have nobody to delegate to. And they're going to be offering $80,000.
Okay.
And so there needs to be, the preference is a certification. The preference is at least 5 years experience as a manager or senior manager. She didn't really necessarily care if they had an HR degree, but would prefer if they were college educated. And so now that client happens to be my client, who happens to have common sense and say, okay, make sure you're not making this a ridiculous requirement. So now you could kind of go backwards from there. If it's an true entry level position, and you really have no expertise, but you sold yourself with your ethics and your morals and your desire and your passion, I mean, you're going to be starting closer to, I want to say even not minimum wage, but like probably high, 28 to 32,000. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's also going to be an hourly position, probably. So that is an equivalent of the salary compensation. And then if you have the certification only, then it's going to be in between there. The reason I can't give you an exact number, and this is regardless of what state you're in, is because I need to know more about the position. I need to know more about the company. What are the benefits? Do you give out bonuses? Okay, well, then I'll take a lower pay. Do you have amazing health insurance and I don't have to pay for it? Oh, well, that's huge. Or do you not have health insurance and I have to pay for it? Well, that's $500 to $800 a month out of my pocket. So, total compensation has to be taken into consideration. And that's just a good point for our listeners today to realize too, even if you're not thinking about an HR career, is when people are offering you money, make sure you look at the big picture. And even if the pay is low, say, okay, will you pay for my training then? Will you pay for my certification? Will you pay for me to take these online courses? Will you pay for me to go to school? because that's huge. And that could really help you then develop a career, get more money there, or get more money somewhere else down the road.
Hmm. Hmm. So the reason why I was kind of being a stickler with the whole pay thing is I'm trying to see if it's worth it for someone to get a degree, because there's this has been like a constant battle between
Yeah.
the market saying that, hey, we don't want to let go of the concept of people needing degrees, and then the current world that we live in, the Gen Zs and I believe the Gen Alphas, that really don't care to get that educated, right? They're under the impression that, hey, this information is readily available, and should I really waste in excess of $50,000 to $60,000 when I can just do a bunch of courses online? And there's people such as yourself
Yeah.
that have an LMS and can provide this information for significantly cheaper costs.
Yeah.
So that's why I was trying to pin whether it
Yeah.
makes sense.
So my personal opinion as the HR lead, somebody who, is in touch with reality, I personally do not think that everybody in HR needs a degree. However, many businesses do not agree with me. So they're going to still want that degree. But eventually they're going to have to realize, like you just said, a lot of younger people are not going after degrees because it's not affordable. And so I think businesses are going to eventually catch up. I just don't know when that is. I hope it's sooner than later, which is why, I've created a learning management system to help anybody, just managers who don't have HR, to learn HR things at a cheap rate. And so my insider access program I just rolled out, teaches people things of what do you need to know about HR, the compliance side and the touchy feely side of, you're a manager, you don't have HR, you're a business owner, you don't have HR, you're a person interested in going for HR, take some, affordable courses. I mean, literally, some of mine are like $27, that are on my website. So it's like, take courses first, cheap ones, not a college degree, and say, oh, yes, I'm in it to win it. I love this. This really, fires me up and gets me excited. Or if you walk away from the course and you go, nope, well, then and you've only wasted, $100 versus $50,000.
So that's a great point. As you were saying that, something popped into my head. You mentioned that if you're a VP, you mentioned that it makes sense that you have a master's in HR, right? Now, the only way you can get a master's is if you have a bachelor's degree. So, is your growth in the profession stunted in the event you elect not to get a
It's
degree?
not. It's not. It's just going to, here's the thing, with a master's degree or without, you still need the experience to get into a VP role. Heck, you still need years of experience to get into the director role or the manager role. So regardless of what your formal education is, including certifications, you still have to put the time in. That's it. End of story. And, I don't care if you went to the best private school there was as a child, you still need the experience, especially in HR, because every time, even to, me, I've been doing this almost 30 years and I'm the HR lady. And there are things every single day that I'm like, that's never happened to me before. I need to go and research that now, because things keep changing in society, laws keep changing, and people change. And so, the way we handle things with baby boomers or Gen X, that's not how we're handling things with the younger generation now. And we need to learn and adjust to that. And then on top of that, like I said in the beginning of the show, is my goodness, laws are changing like crazy, and they're probably going to keep changing. And so, HR, a true HR role, especially if you're a role that's kind of covering everything, you need to be somebody who likes to continuously learn. Otherwise, you're going to just outdate yourself and you're not going to get an interview. So if you only know how to do one thing, and this probably goes with any career at this point in time in life, but, is if you only know how to do payroll, well, eventually, it's already happening. Many payroll roles have been taken over by computers, right? And there used to be this many people in HR or in payroll, and now there's this many, right? And those few people that are left in payroll, man, they're getting some really good money because they're the experts, but nobody else wants to go after that role. So,
Well, actually, I find the opposite. Like, for instance, I'm in the legal field. Under law, I work under civil law. Under civil law, I work under contracts. Under contracts, I work in technology and outsourcing contracts. So, like, they've really narrowed, in at least in the legal field,
yeah,
they really prioritize expertise and industry experience. So they want to pin you down into a very, very like a niche, right? And so I find the opposite. They don't want you to be a generalist. Actually, no, that's not true. It's not like they don't want you to be a generalist. I just think that in the legal field and many other fields, so medicine is like this, accounting is like this, and many other fields, like they really want to hone in on specialties.
yeah.
So I found the opposite in comparison to what you're saying.
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, HR is more generalist, and that's actually the main title, HR generalist, and it's just a weird title. Most people don't want that on their business card. It's like, okay, give me something else. Could you name me HR manager or something like that? But there
Mhm.
are many roles in HR that you could be a specialist, but you have to work for a big company.
Mhm.
And most businesses in the United States are small businesses. And
Fair
so
enough.
if if you live in an area and there's only a few big companies and it requires to be in person, even if it's hybrid, well, there's your few options. Otherwise, you're going to have to
Fair enough. So let me move on from the educational part.
move.
uh, so, can you walk me through what a typical day in the life of an HR person looks like?
So I
And
don't know.
and
My
and as a
yeah,
generalist,
my hair's up in a ponytail today because you pull your hair out, right? No, but in a generalist role, whether you have other people in your department or not, you probably will. You probably have a manager and coworker or two, um, but it could be if it's a generalist role, you're coming in for the day. You might be interviewing somebody for a job, so you might be in charge of pre-screening the resumes to for a job application that's out there. So you're helping the managers out to look at the resumes and say, okay, these four don't have what you're looking for. These four do. Here, do you want me to interview them? And then they say yes. So then you have to come up with interview questions that are legit, legal, valid, reliable, and not discriminatory. So you have to put on your lawyer hat now. And then you also have to put on your, hi, we're a great company. Come work for us. But now I have to ask you some questions that make you uncomfortable. And I have to make sure that they're not illegal questions. So you may start your day off by that. And then somebody may come in your office and say, hey, I have a problem with my PTO. It says that I have this, but I actually should have this. So now you're problem solving the PTO, or they can't figure out, what their prescription plan is. And now you're jumping into prescription plan information. You might be going into a meeting in the afternoon with you and a manager sitting with an employee who's had an attitude problem, and you need to talk to them about that. You could be editing a policy, creating a policy to say, you know what, our policy wasn't clear about attitude problems, so now we have to go change our handbook. Um, and then, you might be ending the day with planning a holiday party. Now you're the party planner too. And by the way, now there's rules for the party too, because we want to make sure people aren't drinking too much or blah, blah, blah. So it could be if you really like, having diverse roles, it's going to be good for you. If you are very, you have a checklist and these are the only things you want to do today, HR generalist role, probably not going to be good for you because you're going to get interrupted 700 times in the first hour that you walk in. You're going to be walking by somebody and you're going to hear them say something and you're going to go, whoa, that's a violation of our policy. Now I need to talk to, John over there and call them in, and I need to write it up and I need to make sure it's legally written up so that they understand that they might get terminated for this. And so it's a lot. Oh, and then on top of that, you might be running a compensation report to see, okay, what is the compensation for this mechanical engineer over here? And you may also be running employee surveys to see, is everybody happy here? And what they're not happy with, we have to go fix. That's a lot, right?
wow, you weren't messing around when you said generalist. That's all over the place.
It's all over. It's all over. And it's almost the end of the year. So right now you're probably also dealing with open enrollment of benefits. So now you have to be a benefits expert too. So, as a generalist, definitely I tell everybody to lean on your vendors and put pressure on them to help you. But you know what? I liked it, even though it isn't what I originally went to school for. When I got into that first HR role, which I ended up in for like well over a decade, I loved it. I loved the change. I loved, jumping all over the place and helping people. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I still love it today. Obviously, I'm the HR lady. But some other people go, whoa, this is too much for me. I cannot handle this. So if you don't think you could handle all of that, just don't go into generalist role, go into a specialist role, which means you may have to work for a little bit of a bigger company. Although small companies do have specialties too. They might have benefits specialist or recruiting specialist or employee relations specialist, for example.
So it's interesting. In the beginning, when you started talking to me, telling me about the profession, I thought you were a recruiter, right? And so you took away their job role. And then you said you have to make sure the questions are legal. So I'm very interested. What are some examples of illegal questions to ask during an interview?
How old are you?
What?
Yep.
Oh, illegal. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Illegal to ask.
Right?
Now, the only time it is legal to ask is a job that, say you were a bartender and in your state, it requires, your state law requires the bartenders to be 21. Then it's okay to ask. But otherwise, age is off the table. Hey, really cool accent. Where are you from? Illegal to ask. Now, it's not that it's illegal to ask that, but why are you asking that? Oh, I was just being cool and nice. I thought it was cool. Okay, but that person thought you were discriminating against them because of their national origin. Oh, so don't ask that. For anybody that's listening, by the way, if you want to go to my website, thehrlady.com, and go to the downloads tab, I have a bunch of free stuff in there. And I even have a list of interview questions that you cannot ask in there. So check it out. And it'll be good for you while you're being interviewed to say, they're not supposed to ask that. Now, most small businesses, or most businesses, I would say, they don't even realize that they're doing these things. I didn't know that was illegal. I got asked that. Well, yeah, you got asked that 40 years ago when it wasn't illegal.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess you did mention before how you deal with boomers is not how you deal with the new generation. So I guess, what are some of the bigger challenges that you face as like an HR professional given the different generations?
Yeah.
And I'm sure like you have boomers in your office, and I'm sure you have millennials, and I'm sure you have Gen Z. So do you have to deal with them differently, or is it just like
it's not that you have to deal with them differently? Here's the big thing. Don't get caught up in generations. Just know that every single human is different and unique. You got to figure out how they want to be communicated with, and then adjust your communication to that individual person. That's it. It sounds easy, right? It's not. So, I also teach a lot on personality styles. And that's in my book, Suck It Up, Buttercup, Be a Leader, People Will Follow. And personality traits too, which is in my other book, which is about dealing with jerks in the workplace. And so, just get to know people as an individual, and don't worry so much about their age, where they're from, their experience. And then you may realize, me, right on my website, it says I have no sugarcoating, no BS. And so you could just tell me like it is. But other people would probably cry if you talk to them the way you talk to me. Right. And so I had to learn that the hard way, because I was doing it. I was talking to other people how I was allowing people to talk to me. And I was like, oh, I'm the jerk right now. I just totally hurt their feelings because of who they are. And now I have to learn about, people before I talk to them. So, but, the one big thing I would say about, boomers versus the younger generations is, boomers didn't even have email growing up. So when we communicate via text and email, they're like, why don't you just come over and talk to me? Right. Or pick up the phone. It's like, well, because that's not how we do it here. So if you, need people to talk to you or communicate with you in a certain way, do it. Like when you call my cell phone, you get the voicemail, it literally says you're better off texting me. And so most people will text me, and that I had a potential client call me the other day and said, that was so cool because I like to text, but I would have never thought the HR lady wanted me to text her. And she's like, hey, I'm interested in your services. Text me. And I said, okay, I'll call you in an hour. I'm in a meeting right now. And it was like, there you go. And you wouldn't have think that because of my age. I just turned 50, but yeah, absolutely text me. I'm in too many meetings for me to answer a phone call.
When I was on your website, I read you're the no BS human expert. So how do you manage sensitive issues like firing someone, and especially in a time where empathy and being soft and gentle is quite a high priority, I would think.
Yeah. So here's the thing. If the person knew they were doing something wrong, whether it's performance or behavior, if they knew because you've been talking to them about it and you've been documenting it and you've been letting them know, hey, you violated our policy, whatever it is, and you have one more chance. And if you do it wrong, if you do it again, you're out. It makes that conversation a lot easier because they were warned. They were trained during onboarding or orientation. This is our company values. This is how we treat people here. If you violate this, word respect, whatever it is, you will not be allowed to work here any longer. Okay, they've been prepared. Unfortunately, what many companies do, they like, oh, it was in the handbook. I write handbooks, and I got to tell you, nobody reads them. So just because it was in the handbook doesn't mean somebody read it. And I don't blame them. There's so many things that are put on humans today, not just workers, humans, that we're expected to, read a 50-page handbook and remember it. All they really do is gloss through it, look for the PTO, and sign it.
It's true. Wow. So what technical and soft skills does someone need to excel in the HR field, especially today?
Yeah. So I'll just answer this as more a generalist role, but all of them. You definitely need like every single soft skill. And so I was going to bring that up when you were talking about empathy. Now there's a difference between sympathy and there's a difference of empathy. So sympathy is when you feel sorry for somebody. You tilt your head to the side and say, oh, I feel sorry for you because of that situation. You don't need sympathy to be in HR. I would hope you have it just to be a human. But what you do need is empathy to say, okay, if I was in your shoes, even though you're silently judging, going, I would never be in your shoes. If I was in your shoes and this happened to me, how would I feel? Oh, now I understand how you're feeling. Now I will talk to you in that manner. But you could have empathy for somebody and still hold them accountable. You could say, I'm sorry. I feel for you that you're going through this hard time at home, at work, in life, with a medical condition, whatever it is. However, you still have to comply with our policies. Here's help. Here's the employee assistance program. Here's some coaching. Here's some other resources that can help you. We'll give you a day off or two, paid or unpaid, to get your act together. But when you come back, you have to comply with our policies. You have to do your job with a good attitude, et cetera, et cetera. You have to learn the soft skills of communication. Guess what, folks that are listening? That's in every role these days. It's not just HR. Every role these days, and this has been for the past 10 years, but definitely since the pandemic, every role requires you to have soft skills. You have to get along with your coworkers. You have to be able to communicate to your manager. You have to, in HR, be able to communicate with everybody in the universe. Candidates, people that have left and are asking about their retirement plan, people that are interviewing, people that are there saying, hey, I have a problem with my coworker, vendors. You have to have that soft skills. The biggest skill that I would say that you should learn right away is to keep a straight face, where I call it game face, where you can say, okay, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Let me get back to you on that. Instead of going, are you crazy? Never say that. Calling someone crazy, by the way, may not then, make them get rights that you didn't know they could potentially get, because crazy is a mental health care condition and is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So just that alone.
Ah,
I know.
you're stressing me out. This is not a
I
field
tell you,
for me.
this is why my hair is always up in a ponytail because I'm pulling it out.
So, so Wendy, have you ever been in a situation where you feel like the candidate should not be, let go or should not be disciplined, but there's like a policy or something that requires you to basically a time where you didn't want to do what you had to do? Like, how do you deal with situations like that?
Yeah, so it's it's hard. What me, Wendy Sellers, the HR lady, does is I sit and tell the employee, this is why you're being written up. This is why this action's happening. However, I'm going to go try to change the policy. you know so if the policy doesn't make sense, change it. You know what I mean? But if they're not getting fired and it's just a write up and you and the employee agree that it was a misunderstanding and it's never going to happen again, big deal. It's something that goes in their record, but they have to do it 3 times to be fired or whatever the rule is. Then who cares? But empathize with the employee and let them know. The bottom line though with HR, it's a 50-50 role, but between us here and everybody listening, it's really 51-49%, where you're 50% for the employee, 50% for the business. But in reality, you work for the employer. So you're 51% for the employer, 49% for the business. And if you ever get to the point in your HR career or any career where you're saying, I don't personally agree with the rules of this company, try your best to change them or find a career somewhere else.
That is great advice because, I've heard this a lot where people get terminated. So essentially, a company wants to get rid of an employee, and then they look through their very lengthy policy, which you said nobody reads, and they're like, let's find a breach and let's pin it on them. And really, really large companies, I don't want to say any of them, I don't want to get in trouble, but it's quite common. And so I'm guessing the people in HR there really struggle because at the end of the day, it's like a
It's
tiny
not the right thing to
breach.
do. It's not the right
Yeah,
thing to do, but they're sticking to it because it's black and white there. And
yeah.
the interesting thing with that scenario though is if they let somebody else get away with that same exact thing and didn't terminate them, and that employee that gets terminated finds out about it or knows about it, there's going to be a major lawsuit because you basically
Mm,
probably discriminated against them. And if unless
yeah.
they're a white male, they're probably, no offense, but there's going to be some categories that they can say, oh, you picked on me because I was a female, that person was a male, did the same thing and got to stay here. Or I'm over 40, they're 20, they got to stay here and do that and I didn't. So that's where it comes back into if you're a generalist or a specialist in the compliance area, putting on your law hat that says, okay, now I need to be a lawyer too, which you really don't need to be a lawyer, but you need to know enough to say, we need to call a lawyer.
Wow, this is interesting stuff. I definitely did not contemplate a lot of this. In your day to day, what kind of tools, software you would consider indispensable in the HR field? And if somebody's very young and trying to start off in the field, they should know.
In most companies, there's going to be some kind of database, such as a payroll system where employees can log in and request, PTO, get their timesheets, all that stuff. Payroll and HR usually both have access to that, but in small companies, HR often is doing the payroll. Again, I don't agree with that. A learning management system, and it's usually called an HRIS system, human resource information system, and it's where you can log in as an employee or excuse me as an employer and get all the information about the employees. So everything down from their social security number, date of birth, their address, their email, their spouse's name, all of that stuff, to all their performance information, their job information, their feedback, their reviews. Have they applied internally again, or have they applied internally for promotions? Do they have SMART goals? Do they have key performance indicators? So I would say most younger people today are going to know how to use it. You don't need to know how to create it. You don't need to be a technology expert, but you definitely need to know how to log in and out of systems and use systems and then create reports. But again, most of those systems are user friendly. So if you're not responsible for having to build the system, you don't need to be a major technology expert. You obviously, I think this goes for most roles right now, especially if you're in a hybrid or remote workplace, you need to use things like Zoom, Google Meets, things like that to communicate with people. Email is a big one, obviously. Again, I think most young people today aren't going to have an issue with the technology as a user unless you have to actually be behind the scenes creating things. But hopefully you can pawn that off on somebody else.
Fair enough. Is that like Workday, ADP list, that stuff,
All of
right?
those smaller companies are probably only going to have like an ADP or a Paychex or something like that, or one of their competitors. So that's going to be their HRIS system. It's really not an HRIS system. It's just where you have some basic communications there. Larger companies, and I would just say 100 employees or more, are probably going to have something more savvy. Big companies are going to have probably like Workday and huge things, including learning management systems and so on and so forth. But payroll systems / HR, where you can store some HR things, and then recruiting systems. A lot of HR generalists in charge of recruiting too, which is honestly a whole other skill, but they group it together. So then you need to figure out how to use like Indeed, LinkedIn, things like that to post job ads.
Hmm. Okay. I'm quite interested in. So I was working on an HR deal, contractually speaking, and so it just poked my brain. And so I was wondering, how important is data analysis in modern day HR, and how do you leverage data to make more informed decisions?
Yeah, data analysis is incredibly important. Unfortunately, a lot of small companies don't use it because they didn't realize that. And so, if you are starting in HR, you're new to HR, you're passionate about going to HR, you could actually be a specialist in data. But that means those HRIS systems that we were just talking about, they need to actually be used. And I see so many companies that they have this HRIS system, but they only use this part of it. And then you can't analyze everything. So if you have no data, if you don't know, if you don't collect and maintain how many people applied to this job, then you can't analyze, right? And
Hmm.
so if you don't have data in, you're not going to get an analysis. But think about it. If you had this amazing recruiting system, an HRIS system, and you're like, we have this job ad open for 3 months and we're barely getting any candidates, or the ones that we are, in the end, we're not selecting them. Why? Okay, well, let's find out what the candidates' resumes looks like. How did they answer questions on the online job application? What did they say the pay was that they expected? Oh, our pay alone is the reason why they're not coming. Or we've told this person that we want them to have a license or a certification, even though it's not really required, and none of the candidates have it. Maybe we need to change our job ad to remove that. But then the other thing is, you can say, all right, we've had a department or a division, and in the past year, there's been a lot of turnover. Let me run a report to see who left, when, who they reported to. So what maybe we can narrow it down to the manager is the issue. I always say, though, don't blame the manager, because the manager may have actually been getting rid of people who shouldn't have been there to begin with, right? And so a report alone is not going to help you make decisions. You have to use your brain and say, okay, well, it was actually good that we had turnover in that department because then we hired the right people, or we had too many people. So don't automatically blame the manager. So data in, data out. If you have enough data, it can really help any department, not just HR. It can help any department change things for the better. The unfortunate thing specifically about HR is, as you can see, that as I'm telling you, it's much more complex than a report. If
Yeah.
there was turnover, this year, but you've already decided January 1st, you're giving everybody pay raises. Well, that may solve it, or it may not, right? So it's always, there's a lot more to consider in HR. So one report, 5 reports aren't going to help you. You need to really step back and say, well, what else has changed here? oh, there was a worldwide pandemic. Let's throw those reports out because they don't mean anything anymore. It had nothing to do with the workplace. So it gets very complicated, but data definitely can help you at least start the ball rolling. But that means you have to start collecting data today, and collecting data is hard. If you've never collected data before, I was working with a government agency. I'm still working with them, but when I first started working with them, they said, okay, we want to improve diversity and inclusion. We want to do an employee survey. We want to do some changes in our company. And we want to start collecting like diversity information. And I was like, your employees aren't going to give you that diversity information. You're a government agency. You've already said they don't trust, the board, which are government elected officials. I'm like, there's no way in heck they're going to say, yes, I'm LBTGQ. No way, no way. They're going to feel judged. Like, we have to fix the culture first before we start asking that. And when we asked that in the survey, a confidential survey that only I had access to who was contributed, and I only had numbers. I didn't even have names. They were like, nope, we're not giving you that information at all. So, it's hard to collect data sometimes.
Fair enough. Well, I was also wondering, is HR involved in data related analysis, such as we have too many employees or the finances of this don't make sense? So, does HR sit with other departments and strategize around how to change the labor force within a company?
So I'm going to answer it this way. HR should. The executives don't always include the right people in those decisions. And so, I do have to say, especially since the pandemic, HR has definitely they're at the leadership table in most companies now. Finally, we've been fighting for it for decades, but we weren't always at the table. I'm there as a consultant, but when I was in corporate HR in the beginning, or even in my mid career, I wasn't always asked at the table. And, they often found out later, oh, we should have brought her in because we just made a major decision and we never talked to Wendy about it. And we opened a business in this one city in California that has a very, very specific PTO law that's going to bankrupt us, because now we have to change our policies. It really wasn't going to bankrupt them, but that's being severe. And they're like, if we only asked Wendy ahead of time about that one city, she would have told us, did you know that there's a couple laws in there that we have to comply with? And they're not. That means those employees are going to get better benefits than the other employees. And it caused a lot of problems. So should HR be at the table? Absolutely, when they're making this decision. Is HR always at the table? Not 100% yet.
Hmm.
We're getting there, though. We're
Well,
getting there.
well, you mentioned laws so many times, including just now. What are the most significant changes that are happening, like now with the new presidency, I guess, and just in general, given the fact that AI's intervened, is that impacting the profession in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I teach HR people almost every single day of my life how to use ChatGPT for HR. And
Hmm.
so I actually have a free course on my website. It's only like, I think, 15 minutes long, that can show you how to use AI for HR. But the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission actually came out with guidance on using AI in selection, meaning in recruiting. And so if you're using a robot, so to speak, to help weed through resumes, the robot may accidentally or intentionally project bias, which could be discriminatory. And it's specifically for people with disabilities because they're not quickly answering questions. And so the robot shoves those people out of the system and says, we're not selecting you to even interview. And it turns out you were supposed to give them a reasonable accommodation because they have a disability. And so that's just one example. So there's the negative effects of AI in HR, but then there's the positive effects that it can help you create memos and emails and, trainings and analyze or say, hey, this is what I want to tell an employee, but I want to say it a lot nicer, and it can rewrite it for you. So there's pros and cons of AI and technology in HR. What was your second part of that question? I don't know if I addressed it.
I was so you kept mentioning laws and how it's changing the environment. I mean, the HR environment.
Oh, hot
What are
laws.
you?
Okay. Other hot laws.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought about that as well. So, for example, January 1st, 2025, the Fair Labor Standards Act, there was a law that changed in 2024 that the minimum wage for salaried employees, exempt salaried employees, went up this year in 2024. Well, it's drastically going up January 1st, 2025, and then if it stays, unless it gets thrown out, it is going to be going up every 3 years. A lot of lawyers are saying right now that they don't believe, but they don't know yet with the new presidency that it's going to be thrown out at the current rate that's going up January 1st because it'll already be an act, enacted. So many companies who can't afford that new rate are having to move those salaried employees to hourly pay, which is fine. But if those salaried employees were already working 45, 50 hours, now you have to pay them overtime at the hourly rate. So things like that are, really affecting HR. And as I already mentioned, things like abortion and marijuana use and the laws associated with that, and the Controlled Substance Act, which I never would have thought I'd even be talking about ever in my entire life on an HR training. And now the Controlled Substance Act is possibly changing. We're pretty sure it's going to change, and it's going to change what the federal classification of marijuana is, which means people like commercial drivers and CDL licenses might be able to be using marijuana and things like that, not right away, but eventually. So, depending on what their state laws are too. So it's a lot. It's definitely a
When
lot.
they're driving?
No, 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 no. I mean, you could
Oh.
always say, I mean, just like maybe they have cancer treatment and they
Oh,
weren't
okay,
able
okay,
to
okay.
use it because there's mandatory drug testing. And if it was a
Mm,
schedule, there's still going to be mandatory drug testing. So that was just a very far off idea that I threw out there. Don't quote me on that one, but that's how serious it can be.
mm. I've also, I mean, everyone knows DEI has been diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a huge impetus in the past little while. So, in the HR world, what are some effective strategies for people to navigate and tackle that issue?
Yeah, so diversity, equity, and inclusion is a hot topic. In the many many powers that be want it to not be a hot topic, but it is. End of story. If you're in a business, if you're human, it is a reality of life. So I would focus on diversity and inclusion. So the DI part, because equity is very, 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 very hard to achieve for any organization ever, because equity is where you're saying, I'm going to make everybody equal, but they weren't equal because they went to different schools and they grew up in different neighborhoods, and this person went to a private school and this person went to the worst school in the United States as a kindergartner. And so the fact that we expect businesses to help with that's a hard one. Are businesses doing that and trying? Yeah, absolutely. But what I tell my small businesses is, let's just focus on diversity and inclusion. And so that means, putting job ads out in places you normally wouldn't put them, so in many different areas, so that maybe you go into neighborhoods that are diverse and put a job ad up on the bulletin board, and they go, oh, I didn't know about that because I don't have access to the internet because I'm poor and I don't have internet. Now I just saw that, posting in my local community center, and now I can go out and apply. So things like that. But the bottom line here is whether you have a diverse workforce or not. And I don't just mean by like skin color, but everything from, age and where somebody was born and what kind of education they have. And let's remove our ridiculous education requirement that we don't really need for that job. Now let's have diversity of thought. Let's start asking people who we normally want to ask, let's ask their opinion on our product, meaning our employees. The managers and the executives, they don't know everything. And they often make decisions and they don't ask the employees that are on the front line when they're the ones that could have told you right away, that's not going to work and here's why. But you didn't ask me. So, that's how I think about diversity and equity. So there used to be laws related to diversity and equity. There still is. There's discrimination laws and anti-harassment laws. So we want to make sure that we are still understanding that, the best business practice is to get all hands on deck and get diverse mindsets in your company, because once you do, you can change the world and you could change your bottom line.
Hmm. Well, you talk a lot about leaders and your book, Suck It Up, Buttercup. So, what does HR leadership mean to you, and how should how should leaders appropriately address some of the HR issues that they run into regularly?
So first I wanted to say that leaders or leadership is not a role, it's an action. So anybody could be a leader. I don't care if you're an entry level person or you're the executive of the company. Anybody can be a leader. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Now, don't say it with that much, attitude, by the way. But anybody could be a leader. So, but what leadership means to me is helping people succeed. Period. That's really it. Whether it's your neighbor, it's a young person working for you, an older person working for you, somebody who needs help with a problem that they're having in the workplace, but it's just helping others succeed. If we help everybody succeed, we're all going to succeed, instead of, I'll put you in your place and I'm in charge, not you. Well, you're just going to stress yourself out. So leadership to me is just helping everyone succeed, which I rely a great deal with my clients. I'm an HR consultant. Most of my clients, my private clients, they don't have HR. So they call me and say, help. And then I help them. I train their managers and I train the business owner how to be HR. So we fix all the broken problems and I train everybody to be HR. And then my goal is to go away. And they only have to call me when something really, really serious happens. And then I help them through that. So, I like committees. I love, love, love problem solving through committees. So that way you could get more than one brain involved. Even if the committee is just 3 people, it could be a committee that only meets once a month or is just there for a special reason and it's only there for 3 months and then it goes away. But that way you can get more people engaged in solving the problem. And the unengaged people, if you have them come in and solve the problem, they might suddenly turn engaged because they're like, finally, somebody's asking me for help. Finally, somebody's listening to me. Okay, I'm back in it to win it with you. So lean on committees as well.
Fair enough. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see companies make then in the HR world?
Oh God, how much time do you have?
Let's go top three.
Okay, top 3, I would say is hiring the wrong people. They're desperate. Somebody just quit. Or even if they didn't quit, they're just growing. They're like, I need a body in here now. No, if you're hiring for a body, that's what you're going to get. And then you're going to be mad. And then on top of that, you not only are you going to want to fire them, they may have rights depending on where you live. And then they may turn around and sue you. So that's the number one thing I see people doing. They hire the wrong person. They rush through the recruiting process. They're not prepared for it. The job description's not accurate. They hire the wrong person for whatever reason it was. And then they keep them and then they get mad at them. And then that person destroys not necessarily morale, but everything around them. Even if they're still a good person and everything, if they're the wrong person, they're the wrong person. And so take your time in the recruiting process. The next thing that I see on the opposite side is they fire people too quickly. They say, now there's sometimes you do want to fire people too quickly. Well, they had violence in the workplace. They're a major safety risk. They're harassment. They stole something like that. Yeah, you want to get them out of there as quickly as possible. But generally, managers might want to, or HR says, okay, we're going to fire this person because they're not the right fit. Well, why? Why have they been here for 3 years and all of a sudden you're saying they're not the right fit? Oh, because you put them in a role that you needed because you were desperate and now you're mad at them. No, why don't we put them back in the other role and see them succeed again? The third thing that I see, it's kind of related to that, is we promote people to managers just because we're desperate to keep them. And we give them no training, no guidance. Today you were a coworker, tomorrow, and you told me you were going to quit. No, come back. I'll make you the manager. Okay, they come back tomorrow and they're the manager and they have no training. They have no idea what it means to be a manager. So they're the 3 things. They hire too quick, they fire too quick, and they promote people specifically to management too quick, or they, let's face it, may have promoted the wrong person to management who had no business being in management. They probably didn't even want to be a manager, which I don't blame them. But they took it because they needed the money.
Mm. It's interesting because so I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of entrepreneurial books, and they say those are major issues, all three of them. Especially the first two I've heard so many times.
Yeah.
The last book that I was reading was talking about there's two types of leaders. One that hold on to talent a little bit too long, and they keep trying to fix the problem,
Yeah.
right? And then there's the other type of managers that act way too soon. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that you said that. So I'd like to know, for anybody that's trying to enter the profession, what are some characteristics that you think that you should have when entering HR, and what are some characteristics that basically you shouldn't consider this profession?
Yeah. So if you don't like people, don't go in HR. If you don't like solving problems, don't go in HR. If you're not good at, communicating, or be willing to communicate and learning new skills about communication, don't go into HR, because HR is a lot of communication, a lot of problem solving, a lot of, depending on what your role is, but research and, learning things all the time, because laws and cultures change, society changes. So that's the no's. Now, there might be some of you that could work for a very, very, very large company, and you're a specialist and you only do payroll and that's it. You still have to communicate with people, but you're not, doing employee relation type issues, investigations and things like that. On the other side, it's the opposite. You have to want to communicate with people, solve problems, help people with their problems, not just hold them accountable, but hold them accountable and help them through it, follow up all the time. You really, really, really should have a desire to learn things all the time, because you're going to need to learn things all the time. And the other thing that I would say is you have to be willing to ask people for advice. I used to, when I was way back in the day, very, very proud, I could figure this out. Heck, I'm the first person to ask somebody now, and I think most people are, really, since the pandemic, in HR, saying, help, I need help, I need help, I need help, but if you're not willing to ask, for help, you're going to drown, because just looking up a law could take 8 hours, because you're like, oh, I found this law. Oh no, I found this court case. Oh no, I found this other one. Oh no, here's this. Just call your lawyer friend and ask them, right? Versus trying to figure it out. Of course, continue to be educated on it, but not right now at noon. I need the answer at 12:30.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone that's just starting off their career in HR? If you can even go back that far.
Ask for help. That's the biggest thing I would say, is ask for help. Get to know your company. So you just landed with a company, or you were in a company and maybe, you got moved over to the HR department. But really take the time to get to know every single department. What does everybody do here? Literally, what does every department do? And how can I help them be better? And I'll give you an example. Well, my first HR experience, I was in an architectural engineering company. We had a construction department. It was really construction administration. I was not, I cleaned everything up in HR. I wasn't that busy. And I was like, I need something to do a little bit, a couple hours a week. They said, you want to help us in construction administration? I'm thinking, no. And I did. And I learned so much about the company. I learned about the people who I was giving a hard time because they weren't putting their timesheet in on time. I realized, oh, they're on an island right now building a hotel, and that island has no, running water or internet. So the last thing they care about right now is their time card, and they have no reason, they have no capability of even doing it. So then we came up with a plan to just get them paid, and we'll pay them overtime when we can get that information. So really get to know every department in your organization, and be a person that says, how can I help? Instead of, no, you can't do that. No, how can I help?
Hmm. That's great advice. That is very good advice. So, By the way, is the HR profession really, really busy in the sense like, are you always working? Like, do you have work life balance? How much do you expect to work in a week?
It really comes down to the culture of the company, so I can't really say yes or no. I mean, I think every job right now, unless you're on an hourly job, but once you get into salaried, I think every job in the world right now is working way too much because we don't have enough humans that have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we need. We have enough humans in this world. We don't have enough humans that have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we need today. And so we need to learn things and train people. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work in HR for sure. But find a company that values work life balance. And if they value work life balance, make sure that you value your own work life balance. And I'm saying this as a reminder to myself after I get off this session today and probably work until midnight because I'm pumping out a new program. But definitely, ask questions in an interview, even if it's a mentorship or an internship, ask questions. Be careful how you ask them. You don't want to be like, oh, it's all about me. It's all about me, but ask questions about the company culture and their mission, vision, and values and their work life balance. And how often do you give feedback? When do I get reviews? What are the training and development opportunities here? And then you will be able to see, okay, this company cares about me. So yeah, I'm going to start at the bottom, but they prove that they care about their employees. So then I can go up the ranks.
Nice, nice. Well, I feel like I know a whole lot more about HR, and I like to close off all my interviews by it's a career podcast. So I like to ask each and every single guest, what is the best career advice that you have received?
The best career advice that I probably have received is you don't have to be in love with your position. You don't have to be like, oh, this is the best thing in the world, but you have to make sure you're not miserable. I'd prefer you to be passionate about what you do, to really enjoy what you do, to wake up in the morning and not think of it as a job and just a paycheck. But there are some jobs that that's okay with. And, so you have to figure out if you are a passionate person, then you need to be in a job that you're passionate about. If you're a person that says, no, I could have a 40-hour job here and then might be passionate about other things in my personal life, then that's fine too. And then any career really is going to work. You're still going to have to learn to, be an expert in it eventually.
Mm. That's good advice because a lot of people are looking for that perfect fit, right? And it may or may not exist for you.
The last thing that I would say is if you're saying, well, I'm going to try out a couple careers before I decide, that's okay. But eventually employers are going to judge you on your resume and they're going to call you a job hopper. So you have to make sure you express that on your resume in your interview that says, these are my 5 passions. So I'm trying to get jobs in here so I can narrow it down to 1 or 2. And I did say the last thing, but I am going to say one more thing it's common nowadays, and it's going to continue to be more common for people to have maybe 2 part-time jobs. So you could have one passion over here and one passion over here. Just know that you may suffer with benefits because of that.
Can you
So
elaborate on that?
meaning most companies
So,
only offer benefits to full-time employees.
okay. And why do you think people have two part-time jobs? Why do you think
Well,
there's going to be an increase in people having two
so
part-time
it
jobs?
actually happened during most of millennials' lifetime because of economic crashes. So they had to pull things together and they were working a job here, a job there, maybe an independent contractor over here. So millennials are used to that already. And then it happened during COVID too. So that's something recent where it was like, okay, on top of that, since many young people might still be on their parents' health care, you're not going to be on it forever. You have a little bit more options where you could say, I'm going to do an internship over here and a part-time job over here until I could figure out my passion. But I'm not going to lie to you. Employers are going to judge you if you continue doing that. But it's all about how you word it and how you word it on your resume and in your interview too.
Fair enough. Okay, so the final question. What is the worst career advice that you've ever received?
Oh boy. Um, I wouldn't even say that it's that I've received, but that I've heard is, oh, you have to be at every job for 5 years or 7 years before you could move somewhere else. That used to be true a long time ago. It's not true anymore. I think employers would love to see that you've been at a job for 5 years and that now you're looking. But let's face it, the reality is most people barely even stay at a job 2 years anymore. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but there is judgment against that. So if you're miserable at a job, find another career, find either another career or another company. The good thing is most people are looking, so they may not judge you because they may say, that's fine, I get it. They may also know the company that you're working at and say, no, we understand why you're leaving.
Fair enough. I thought that number was two. If you job hop every 2.5-ish years, you were
That's
safe.
what it is now.
Uh,
That's basically what it is now. But I would say 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, it was a lot more. And I personally like to see resumes that you're at more than one job because I want you to know that every company culture is different, and I want you to bring different experiences. But that's me. I'm a realistic person. Not every other HR person or business owner is.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, is there anything else you would like to tell people that are considering the path of HR?
The only thing I would like to say is if you want to reach out to me and ask me questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. Just let me know that you've been on this podcast. My email is wendy@thehrlady.com. I have a podcast as well, the HR Lady Podcast. So I'm always giving out free advice on there. And I have a lot of really great guests on there too that they can give you their HR experience as well. So connect with me online on any of the social medias and check out my website, thehrlady.com, because I have some free trainings on my recently launched learning management system.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wendy. It has been an absolute pleasure. I learned a lot about HR. Hope the viewers do as well. And have a great, great night.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this episode of the My Career Shop podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a better idea of what to expect once you enter the HR field. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and comment on what professions you want me to invite next and what other information you would be interested in. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.